So welcome everyone to the webinar today. My name is Tara Donadio, and I am the Sustainability Planner for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. For those of you who don't know us, CDRPC is a regional planning and resource center that serves Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation, communication, collaborating, and facilitating regional initiatives. We work with partners to help them address regional problems. And CDRPC has historically organized a two annual day-long workshops to provide training and planning, training to planning and zoning board members, code enforcement officers, elected officials, and planning professionals. Planning board and zoning board of appeals members are required by state statute to obtain 4 hours of training a year. Town, village, and city zoning board of appeals and planning board members, as well as county planning board members, must receive training as well. So in light of the New York pause and restrictions imposed in an effort to combat the spread of COVID-19, CDRPC has canceled our spring workshop, an event that provided a full days of credits to board members. We recognize municipalities are still in need of training outlets and have organized an ongoing webinar series for participants to obtain credits. We just want to give a special thanks today to WSP for sponsoring this webinar and their effort to bring their expertise to you today. So municipalities have a wide latitude in defining what training is acceptable for credit. After each webinar in the series, each attendee that registered with an email address will receive an email confirming attendance. This email may be submitted to your municipality for consideration of credit. In addition, for practicing AICP certified planners, we have submitted this session for 1 hour of CM credit to the APA. So just a few housekeeping notes. Our attendees join with audio and video off for security purposes. This doesn't mean you're not able to ask questions, so please do so using the chat or ask questions button at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to be moderating and interjecting from time to time with your questions as the speakers present. These presentations are going to be archived as a PDF, and it's being recorded as well. The links to these materials will be at cdrpc.org website, so look for the link in your post-event confirmation email. So now onto the topic of today's webinar. Complete streets and transit-oriented development, or TOD, are distinct but related topics. TOD is a way of developing that is intended to encourage not just greater transit usage, but also increased walking and cycling. For this to not just be practical, but attractive to a wide audience, the streets in and around any TOD must connect to transit and be built to accommodate all modes. Complete streets are growing in popularity around New York State as a way to improve the quality of life in our communities, as well as develop our multi-modal transportation systems. This presentation will provide an introduction to the role of complete streets programs and the social life of a community and how they allow the public to gather in spaces and recreate, and will also include descriptions of several recent projects in Eastern New York. TOD offers a wide variety of benefits to communities interested in providing adequate housing for their residents at lower environmental, social, and economic costs. While TOD is traditionally associated with heavy or light rail, the trend is towards TOD built around bus rapid transit systems. This presentation will introduce TOD, discuss some of its benefits, and talk about some of the strategies necessary to achieve successful projects. We're joined today by presenters John Loughran and Nicole Shute of WSP. John leads WSP's urban design and placemaking practice. He has an expertise in transit-oriented development and redevelopment based on an understanding of the relationship between the built environment and transportation. Projects include equitable development around bus rapid transit in Raleigh, North Carolina, a community-based TOD plan for 5,000 housing units and 500,000 square feet of retail and commercial space to spur economic development in Hempstead, New York, a TOD master plan and entitlements in Tysons, Virginia for 5 million square feet of mixed-use development linked by parks and open space, and design guidelines for the overbuild above Manhattan's Hudson Yard. Nicole leads the municipal services practices in WSP's Briarcliff Manor office, a department specifically focused on assisting municipalities and local communities with addressing their aging infrastructure issues. She has over 20 years of engineering experience in the design, development, and presentation of vital transportation projects throughout the Hudson Valley region. She is thoroughly familiar with the locally administered federal aid project process, from environmental permitting and right-of-way approval to detailed design and production of construction documents. So on that note, I'd like to first welcome Nicole to discuss TOD. Or I'm sorry, Complete Streets.
Yeah, can't get too ahead of ourselves here. So I am, let's see here, let's make sure I can, let me make sure that I'm able to do this here. Share. And can everyone see my screen? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming everyone can. Hi, my name is Nicole Shute, and as much as I'd like to be presenting to you in person, you know, here we are online at this online forum. As Tara mentioned, I work in the Briarcliff Manor office. That's Westchester County, and I run the municipal engineering department, and it's sort of a specific group, you know, sort of all jack of all trades group that we service a lot of the smaller local clients in the area, and specifically Hudson Valley region. My involvement in Complete Streets usually comes in the form of DOT local projects review. There's a Complete Streets checklist, you know, and in which DOT discusses where and how we can incorporate Complete Streets aspects into every project, bridges, roads, every type of project, you know, in whatever form that is able to be incorporated. No matter what type of transportation project, all these projects can benefit from some aspect of Complete Streets. So what is a Complete Street? You know, Complete Streets principles were developed to address all users' needs, you know, both present and future, young and old, all levels of mobility, and all types of transportation. Designs consider accessibility, safety, and in doing so improve the transportation experience for all users and for all transit modes, really. You know, no pun intended, but a Complete Streets puts all users on an equal footing. The improvement really can be measured in many ways also, in addition to increased safety and reduction in pedestrian related crashes. Well-designed roadways can improve circulation, reduce congestion, increase mass transit use, provide more efficient movement of travel and goods, and you know, well-designed with a lot of aesthetic enhancements certainly can spur economic development and improve neighborhood quality of life. So when did all this happen? You know, much of our recent engineering design practices has focused on the automobile. You know, Complete Streets looks to put a higher emphasis on other modes of travel, particularly pedestrians and bicyclists, but also connectivity and access to mass transit users. You know, a quick Wikipedia search I did revealed that Oregon, go figure, right, enacted the first Complete Streets-like policy back in 1971. But it sort of makes sense because we have long relied on the automobile, but in recent years, you know, the love of the car seems to have diminished somewhat. Governor Cuomo signed the Complete Streets Act in August of 2011. It went into effect in February of 2012. And then 2 years later, DOT issued the Complete Streets report, which synthesizes all of their information that they collected during their public outreach. It gives a reference to best practices. It lists the design guidelines that they published through their DOT manuals, and just gives a best practices outline. Since this act was put into place, nearly 150 municipalities, you know, towns, villages, cities have gotten resolutions for incorporating Complete Streets policies into their projects, and 15 counties in New York State as well. So why the trend? Again, you know, statistics have indicated that automobile usage is, you know, perhaps not a precipitous dip, but definitely on the decline in specifically in the past 10 years or so. And a lot of the 20 and early 30 somethings are really looking toward alternative transportation options and healthier transportation options. Mass transit, bicycling, walking have really contributed to, a declining emphasis on the automobile. Because of that, some revenues that are specifically earmarked for infrastructure funding have declined, and that, coupled with a desire for increased transportation alternatives, has really driven the trend toward complete streets designs, and also TOD as well, as John will review in the following presentation. And now, why the trend? Why do we want to have complete streets incorporated into our projects? Well, there are a lot of public health benefits associated with the complete streets. Complete streets, as I mentioned, do put a higher emphasis on bicycling and walking. So certainly the increased activity can lead to greater public health. The complete streets also incorporate designs that are able to be used by all aspects of people with different levels of mobility, so safer, more accessible streets, a lot of times welcoming and friendlier with increased landscaping and other amenities are incorporated into complete streets designs. This also can lead to enhanced aesthetic value, economic revitalization, which is attractive to new businesses, new residents, increased property values, the whole 9 yards. Complete streets, they play a role in making a community healthier, more vibrant. It reduces environmental impact. There are a lot of really statistically proven benefits that come along with the incorporation of complete streets policies in your design. So where can one incorporate some of these concepts? Well, pretty much everywhere can have some aspect of complete streets in their design. The New York State law specifically indicates that all federally and state-funded projects must consider complete streets. Projects that are 100% locally funded aren't subject to this law, but with all of the municipalities enacting a lot of the resolutions related to complete streets, there is a high probability that the complete streets, you should at least consider it in a lot of your work. The state law also indicates that all, of course, new and replacement projects, rehabilitation, resurfacing, and maintenance projects, although I did see that there was some discrepancy on that, but at a very minimum, the ADA compliance has to be considered in all of those types of projects. And as I said, multiple municipalities and counties in New York State have enacted policies, and over 1,600 complete streets policies are now in place in the US. And federal legislation is under consideration. There's a Complete Streets Act of 2019 that's been in the works for over a decade. So with increasing support, maybe one day we will see it incorporated into a future transportation law. So how can these concepts be incorporated into your design? Well, through each phase, it's important to keep complete streets in mind while progressing through a project. From initial idea of a project to getting buy-in from stakeholders to the design, construction and ribbon cutting, really, of a new project. Considering complete streets early is important because you can also have legislators and those in charge of funding see that the support from the community is there, and a lot of the funding can be tied back into a project. DOT has a checklist early on in their project that, as I said, I see quite extensively to help determine the need for improving or adding bicycle and pedestrian transit and freight accommodation. It just sort of formalizes the DOT's requirement there. then in each design, through all phases, these are the 5 main components that Complete Streets addresses. Pedestrians, intersections, vehicles using the roadway, bicycles, different types of bicycle facilities, and then mass transit, stops and locations of stops. Those are all the components that typically are addressed in a Complete Streets design. So the phases, during planning, identify early where Complete Streets concepts can be incorporated. Discuss the challenges to meeting some of these Complete Streets, and talk to the users and understand what, specifically if there's a high incidence of crashes, the intersection design would be a perfect location to incorporate some of this work. The design, there are a lot of guidelines and best practices that are out there. And in New York State, the DOT manuals have all been updated to include Complete Streets concepts. The highway design manual, the bridge detail sheets give some good design advice. Engagement, again, having buy-in and support from all groups involved, municipal officials, transportation agencies, the mass transit, the corporations that run those lines, civic groups, community members, residents, each of these can help promote the use of Complete Streets aspects in your project. And then education, make sure that all of the stakeholders know what a Complete Streets is. I've seen instances where there have been pushback on a Complete Street only because the education hasn't been there. Attend training, there are, websites and workshops. And if you're in a project, make sure that you have publicized the benefits of incorporating Complete Streets in your project so that the public knows what they're getting into. So these 5 main components of the Complete Streets design. Pedestrians, they occupy the sidewalk. It's their main route for travel, and it's really the key to promoting residential, commercial, and social activity in a lot of communities, urban, suburban, rural. They should be safe, they should be comfortable, they should be attractive, and provide accommodations for all users, regardless of age, mobility. In addition, Complete Streets can also give a sense of place, with street furniture and lighting, landscaping. All of these listed here are good elements to incorporate in a Complete Streets design. Intersections, they're the key decision points for the users of the roadway. Intersections are important activity nodes. They unfortunately account for the highest percentage of serious and frequent conflicts between pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. And that's the main reason why good intersection design is important in every project, but also in Complete Streets projects. Curb ramps are the key to ADA compliance and accessibility, and that's an important part of intersection design. Vehicles, as I said, the vehicle emphasis on vehicle and roadway design, we're trying to, in a Complete Streets project, a lot of it is for speed mitigation or looking to improve safety of shared users through a lot of these designs listed here, narrowing of streets, medians, traffic circles, roundabouts. This will increase safety, increase aesthetics. Those are all elements in the Complete Streets design. And bicycles, there are 3 levels of bicycle routes. There's an exclusive, shared use path for solely pedestrian bicycles, conventional bike lanes, which are marked, and then just signage. Depending on the context, each of these can be incorporated. It also, bike paths can promote connectivity to other destinations or other mass transit. And the mass transit options, most most of the mass transit design features have to do with the amenities, the locations of the stops. You know, make sure that they're in a location where users are available. Make sure that the amenities provided can be an attractive space for users to wait for a bus or a light rail. Connectivity is important in all of the different components to a complete streets design. Dedicated bus lanes and signal prioritization. That's kind of another thing that will promote usage of mass transit through a quicker ride from point A to point B. So here are some of the project examples that WSP has worked on, or I specifically has worked on, and not to if this is a competing planning organization, but WSP Planning did work extensively with the City of Albany in the preparation of the Complete Streets Policy and Design Manual. This manual was developed to codify, to put into words the design concepts for complete streets, and helps each municipality and each project to determine which concepts can be incorporated appropriately into their designs. WSP was in charge of developing some street topologies and some of the other concept design, and so then once you take these topologies, which is sort of a further description of a functional classification involving the context, you can, based on geometry or speed or neighborhood, apply one of the topologies to your project and select which of the complete streets aspect you can incorporate. This one in particular, also WSP assisted with the layout of some intersection design best policies. This particular slide depicts an intersection with a high bicycling and transit element. Although this is not a specific intersection, you can pull a lot of these elements into a typical intersection design. Green infrastructure, stormwater management, these were a couple of other items that were incorporated into the policy. Green infrastructure, so that water quality treatment is important. Keeping sidewalks and roadways free of ponding, also important aspects. This is a project that my group worked on in the village of Sleepy Hollow. It wasn't a complete streets full project, the funding wasn't there, but they did want to incorporate a lot of their designs into some of the work that we did. So the ADA curb ramps, many of them were constructed quite a while ago and not ADA compliant. So all of those were updated. The new street furniture, new street trees, something just to enhance. It's a pretty walkable neighborhood. It has a lot of business frontage. The sidewalks are all replaced so that the community can come back to a healthier and more aesthetically pleasing area. And then the other location that we did a lot of work on was the intersection. No pedestrian signals were in place before, and our ADA compliance again requires the pedestrian signals, so they were incorporated, and new crosswalks, new curb ramps for this project. And more ADA compliance, it's sort of an easy and simple way to make sure that accessibility is improved on a lot of projects. This was a project in New Jersey. It was 13 signalized intersections, 185 ADA curb ramps. If nothing else, this is a good piece from the Complete Streets to incorporate into almost any project. And this is a project, it's for the town of Newcastle. It's the hamlet of Chappaqua. And this project was truly a complete streets project in the sense that we improved the sidewalks, we improved the placemaking, we improved the drainage through green infrastructure. We talked to the community, we talked to the steering committee, we talked to the town board, all understanding what concepts they wanted to improve in their neighborhood. Again, it's a village in Westchester County. It's walkable. There's a lot of nice businesses, and improving their public spaces was important to them. And additionally, this particular intersection did have a high incidence of pedestrian vehicle conflict. Pedestrian signals were implemented, a new traffic light, along with some additional public spaces for pedestrians to congregate. And the traffic calming measures, there was some road narrowing through some bulb outs and better turning radius for some of the larger vehicles. Just some pictures of the completed work. You know, again, we did incorporate some tree pits with biofiltration swales, pedestrian lighting, a lot of aesthetic enhancements. There were also a lot of other infrastructure improvements, including, you know, utilities and some uneven sidewalk work. But in the end, this is one of our projects that we think had turned out quite well as far as improving the communities. And finally, just to talk about some of the larger agencies in which you can incorporate, you know, some limited scope elements from Complete Streets. This is from the George Washington Bridge. There was the ramp as it existed included stairs, which obviously are not able to be navigated by those of limited mobility. So this project included a ramp for shared use path, exclusive shared use path for bicyclists and pedestrians. Not to mention too, it connects parks with residences, it connects, you know, parks with mass transit. There are a lot of nice pieces that can be incorporated into some of these larger agency projects. And, you know, on that, I think I just want to turn it over to John, and he can talk about the transit-oriented development, of which, you know, Complete Streets is kind of a nice piece. So here we go. Stop share. John, take it away.
Nicole, I just have one question here from the audience. Is there a speed limit? Is there a limit for speed for crosswalks for 4 to 5 lane highways? So is there speed limit for crosswalks for 4 to 5 lane highways? Sorry, there was a few extra words.
You know, I don't know. I do know that in order for a lot of the mitigation measures for crossing a 4 to 5 lane crosswalk, you know, you can put in a median, you know, and that can reduce the amount of time it takes to get from a safe spot to a safe spot. You know, you can lengthen the pedestrian timing signal. I don't know about speed. The one instance that I can think of where that has come into play for me personally is in Yonkers, and where we did do just that. The signal timing was so long because they had crossed the street through, you know, 4 to 5 lanes with one unprotected, you know, no protected median. So we put that in, and that is one solution. As far as speeds, I'm not sure about that. I could look it up though, and you know, if you list that question, we could do some investigation.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, John, I think you're up.
Okay, hold on. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Okay, so is that working for everybody?
It is, yeah, we see presenter mode, but if you're okay with that, I'm not. not quite sure how to direct you to get out of that, but I don't think it's that big of a deal.
No, it's okay.
A surefire way to get out of it, if you want to, is to unplug your second screen. But it's, again, it's not that big of a deal.
Okay, sorry everybody. Okay, there you go. There. Is that working now?
One of the audience is saying choose a slideshow icon. I don't know.
That one.
There you
Is that
go.
working for everybody?
Great, thank you.
And thank you, whoever in the audience helped me work through this. So once again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is John Loughran. I head WSP's urban design and placemaking practice. It's a national practice. That's most of my urban designers are in New York City. Do a lot of work in the Northeast, but once again, we're a national practice. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are happening here, but they're drawn from lessons learned from all over the country. Most of my work now is actually transit-oriented development around bus rapid transit, as opposed to traditionally it was around light rail or heavy rail. So that's a change that's probably happened very recent, last 3 or 4 years. But there's really been a shift from transit-oriented development around rail to transit-oriented development around bus rapid transit. So what is transit-oriented development? You're probably more familiar with the images on the left-hand side of the screen. You know, sort of a medium density project, maybe a little more dense. You know, TOD is always mixed use, right? You want walkable places to go, but usually it's got a residential focus or maybe a commercial focus, maybe it's a retail destination. But really the way that I approach transit-oriented development, and we all should, is that it's not about one size fits all. So when you think of transit-oriented development, you probably think of the images on the left, but the truth is that it could be lower density or more of a middle density product, stacked townhouses, as shown in the upper right-hand corner. But I also want to come back to the complete streets and the connectivity. You know, often I work on corridor plans, and it's important that every station, every transit-oriented development proposal really starts to leverage the assets around that station. Like what makes that station destination special? And sometimes it's ripe for development. Sometimes it's going to be ready for development in 5 or 10 years. And sometimes it's not about development, but it's about getting existing residents or workers or employees from where they live and work to the new station. So that's where complete streets comes up, or a trail network. So once again, this is all, to me, this is all transit-oriented development. It's very customized to the location neighborhood. And it's not just about development, but it's about getting people that live there or could live there to the station. So you know, TOD really can provide transit-oriented development around transit, really can provide benefits. You know, it's been proven to reduce denser development around TOD, has been proven to reduce automobile trips. You can see on the slide here, it's not just multifamily that reduces automobile trips, but it's multifamily associated with transit that really has the positive impact on reducing vehicle trips. Transit-oriented development can also increase property values. There's people that really want to be near transit and will pay a premium, but I think the whole concept, or I know the whole concept of transit-oriented development of living in a pedestrian-scaled mixed-use community where you can get to transit is a draw, but I think just the fact of a walkable mixed-use destination brings other people as well. So, you know, here's an example in northern New Jersey outside New York City where when transit service and connections were improved, there was an average 5% increase in home sales prices, you know, in close proximity to the station, which is fairly impressive. So TOD can promote walkability, and we heard about complete streets. The way that transit works best is you have a place to go to. You know, I say we don't build transportation for the sake of transit. We build it to get someplace. So having a series of destinations at your transit stops, you know, creates walkable destinations, but also drives ridership. And here you can see some of the benefits, just a more positive view of the neighborhood. I just want to point out too, besides resiliency and walkability, it also improves resiliency. Because if for some reason you can't use your car, it's in the shop, you're an older person, a younger person, you've got that backup too. And I think the last few months you all learned the importance of resiliency in our planning. So it also provides an opportunity to capture younger markets. You know, we've all read that auto ownership is going down. Teens are actually driving this trend, young adults. You know, there's the facts, but I hear this anecdotally from my Uber driver here in New York that their daughter or children doesn't drive. But I also heard this at public meetings in Raleigh, North Carolina, in fairly suburban locations, that the younger generation just does not drive as much. They use Uber, they bike. It's more about getting someplace than driving someplace. And that's where transit comes in TOD. So what makes TOD successful? I really start with the fact that transit-oriented development is anchored by transit, but it's really just the basic principles of really good neighborhood design. You know, it's connected by transit, of course, but it's also walkable, right? The way that you get mixed uses that you can walk to is it's more focused development. It's not dispersed, it's more focused. Now that doesn't mean that you can't have denser development at the station that drops off fairly quickly to lower density residential neighborhoods beyond, but it's definitely focused and diverse. And I mean that in all aspects, right? It's multimodal, right? Connected to transit, but also great ped and bike connections too. Increasingly, the first last mile is being handled by, you know, on-demand car services like Uber, and it's a diverse mix of uses, right? You know, we're used to driving to our destinations, but if you're on transit, once you get off the train or bus, you want to be able to walk somewhere. So it's a diverse mix of uses as well. And finally, you know, Nicole brought this up, and I'm going to reinforce it. Although we're talking about transit-oriented development, it's really pedestrian-oriented. So,
John, I just have a quick question here on that topic, but this person would like your thoughts on best practices for what low-density TOD is.
Oh, low-density TOD, I think it really goes back to the street grid. If you look historically at some of the trolley suburbs, there are some great neighborhoods that are not terribly high dense, but they're walkable. They get people to ride transit, and I think it's all about the scale of the neighborhood. The way that we design now is so geared towards cars that even when it's a pedestrian environment, we're designing the realm for the car. You know, Cole talked about the radius on a curb in a downtown area, right? Clearly in Sleepy Hollow, New York, people were walking, and yet the curb radius was designed for a car to make a quick turn, right? Our block lengths are excessively long in some of our more low-dense neighborhoods. That's because they're geared towards cars. So I think the key is in a lower density neighborhood, it's focusing on the walkability and the connections. So I think that improves the transit connections, because you can get the transit you want to get out of your car.
Great, thanks.
So how does this all come together? This is Somerville outside Boston. This is actually near a commuter rail stop. And this was a former industrial site that had been redeveloped at some point as sort of big box car-oriented retail. And this is what it is today. And the elements that I'm going to be talking about are all evidence here. And I'll talk about the infrastructure that you need to support transit-oriented development. But this is how it comes together. A mix of uses, denser than what's around it, but not terribly dense, and really just the place you want to be, whether you get there by bus, train, or just walk around the neighborhood. So there's key elements, you know, if you're planning or you want transit-oriented development to happen, you really need to plan for it up front. It's really about understanding that if you don't plan for it up front and you put transit in and low density, auto-centric development happens, it's going to be many, many years before that redevelops. And transit-oriented development and walkable, livable, mixed-use communities are so in demand that in many markets, you know, once an agency commits to building transit, development will happen in advance of transit. You know, ideally, a developer is building a development that opens up when transit opens, not several years later. So that's why you got to plan for TOD with transit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure strategies that can really prime the pump, set the stage for transit-oriented development to happen. Of course, transit is one of them. But once you have that transit stop, what do you do? So there's two categories this falls into. The first category is really multimodal connectivity. And these are types of improvements that strengthen connections to transit. I can't emphasize enough the fact that historically, traditionally, we've designed transit as a standalone element. If you think about the heavy rail transit built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, BART in San Francisco, WMATA in Washington, D.C., they're full of these very suburban stations that even if they're in walkable neighborhoods, you have to drive to. A lot of highway stations too, they're just hard to get to. So the multimodal connectivity is very important for TOD to succeed and for transit to succeed. And the second is really compact and mixed use development. You know, there's a question about lower density development, and certainly TOD can be lower density, but what's also critical is the mix of uses. There's usually a use that predominates, you know, predominantly residential station, predominantly commercial station, but it's really about the mix of uses that create a complete destination at the station. So I'm going to talk about some of these strategies in greater detail. So complete streets. You know, we heard a lot about that, and it's not just about walkability and creating a place where people can walk, but it's a place where people can bike to the station. Perhaps there is a bus rapid transit connection that connects to a rail station, so you want to keep room for that. And it's really about streets that really reflect the neighborhoods that they're in. The way that we traditionally design streets is there's sort of one or two types to pick from, and they're all based on the car capacity. And what really want to understand, this goes back to what makes TOD successful. It's understanding what's unique about each community and really leveraging those assets, right? Whatever that asset is, open space, a great residential neighborhood already, you know, sites that could be redeveloped. The same applies to the street network as well. You really want to identify what's unique about that and tailor your street network to the modes of transit, the pedestrian experience, and the development that's going to be supported. So great public spaces. You know, I mentioned earlier that you know, we design everything as if we're in a car, even if it's a downtown. And the best example is you go to many walkable downtowns, and the signage on these retailers is, you know, 6 feet high by 20 feet long, because that's the way we put a highway up on a sideway to attract a car. Well, people walking don't experience places that way. So the public spaces around the stations and the neighborhoods are so much more important. You know, gateways for the station, let people know that you've arrived at the station. For amenities for residents and workers, you know, if we're talking a denser environment, these type of things become more important. One of the things that we learned with coronavirus is that it's so important to have these sort of public spaces where we can kind of get away from each other, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but distance, but still be in an active space. So that just shows the importance of public space and the importance of it. If you think about great spaces, you're usually associating a great city with their great public space. So prioritizing places over parking. There's a little bit of myth about transit-oriented development that nobody drives, and really what you're doing is you're changing the mode share so that it prioritizes transit, right? Gets people out of car, they walk, but it doesn't eliminate parking. It's an entirety. As a matter of fact, if you're planning for very dense transit-oriented development, you're probably parking quite a few cars as well as serving the residents by transit, but it's how you deal with that parking. You know, it doesn't really matter what a great street is if there's 5 rows of parking between that and the building. So you really want to make sure that the building respects the street and the parking is secondary. Not that it's not important, but you need to deal with that in a comprehensive way. Maybe it's certainly reduced parking requirements because you're relying on transit, but it's also concealing the parking. It's providing it where it's needed, and maybe it's also bundling parking. Often we get inefficient parking because we Every developer parks on their own parcel. So a strategy that a city can use, an agency can use, is bundling the parking for transit, but including parking for adjacent uses so that developers aren't burdened with that. So it spurs development and just creates a better place. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about mixed use developments. Once again, this kind of goes back to designing our cities around the car, where we tend to have single use destinations. And really successful transit-oriented development really supports communities, and communities have a mix of uses and a mix of needs, right? And the key here is that they're walkable and connected. If we think about our typical, the way we develop now, we have an office park, we have a retail, shopping center, and we have housing. So this is really bringing those together. And not that the entire neighborhood around the station needs to be mixed use, but it's really about creating a destination right around the station that has a mix of uses that supports real neighborhood opportunities for interactions and just makes walking much more interesting than if you had a monoculture of uses. So it's about being strategic where you're growing. You know, TOD, as I said, really needs to be customized to each station area. And part of that is having developable sites that can be densified near the station. You know, often I work in communities like, well, we have this like area that's ripe for development, but you can't actually get to it from the station. So it's about the densest development being at the station, and that tapering back to lower density neighborhoods. And this can happen fairly quickly. You know, sometimes we don't realize how much density we could actually accommodate in a quarter mile to a half mile from a station, right? But just, I mean, think about walking a quarter mile or half mile. If that was actually fairly densely developed, it's a pretty good node, pretty sizable amount of people. So once again, it's about growing near transit, not distant from transit. So another strategy for transit-oriented development is adaptive reuse in neighborhood infill. A lot of times when I work in these communities, there's a vacant parcel that can be redeveloped, but there's also buildings that can have a new life, a new purpose, whether it's a warehouse loft that's becoming a residential building, or it's a commercial retail storefront that's now become this sort of live workplace. So it's really about thinking creatively. Two benefits: sometimes those uses can get off the ground quicker. It's also a really good tool to change perceptions. Often, as part of planning for transit-oriented development, I'm meeting with the public and neighbors and agencies, but I'm also meeting with the development community to find out what, from their perspective, will spur development. And sometimes it really is just, you know, once we meet with them, they walk away from me like, wow, there's actually more potential than I thought. So adaptive reuse can actually change perceptions of a community quicker than new development. So, and then finally, how does it all come together? So this is an example in Buffalo, New York, where they're extending their light rail, which is one of the first earliest examples of light rail in the US in the revival in the 80s. They're extending the system, planning for it, and you can see a lot of those strategies I just talked about for infrastructure implemented here. Walkable, mixed use, open space. And once again, we're planning for this TOD in conjunction with planning the extension of the light rail, and that's how it should happen. So what about bus rapid transit? You know, in Albany and the area around it, there are several bus rapid transit lines that are recently opened or underway. So I'm assuming you're familiar with bus rapid transit, but basically bus rapid transit is a bus that prioritizes the bus service, improved frequency, more comfortable buses, and dependable. One of the things that does separate bus rapid transit from light rail or heavy rail is the flexibility. A bus rapid transit system can be in a fixed guideway for most of its alignment, and they go off and serve existing destinations. And that gives it service that's competitive with fixed guideways, right? Light rail, heavy rail, but at a much lower cost, which is why, as I said earlier, almost all of my TOD projects are now around bus rapid transit, not rail. So bus rapid transit, you know, often it has a dedicated running way, which is what gives it the service levels of rail, special vehicles, improved boarding experience, right? Their actual station is not just a stop on the side of the road. And then strategies that really just improve customer service and speed service. Often a real-time information kiosk you know, as a transit rider, sometimes it's not that I have to wait 10 minutes, it's that I don't know how long I have to wait. So real-time information, which we can do now. And then other strategies like off-board fare collection that speeds boarding and unloading. So often bus rapid transit makes up time in its schedule, not by saving, you know, 5 or 10 minutes in one fell swoop, but by saving 30 seconds at a dozen locations. So what's important about bus rapid transit and how bus rapid transit can spur transit-oriented development, it's really about providing high quality BRT. It's about investing in infrastructure and creating a brand that captures riders of choice. You know, often BRT is really just a nicer bus, but if you really want TOD to happen, it really should be a premium service. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the advantages I actually see to BRT TOD is that at a certain point, a bus can go off of its alignment to serve existing destinations, existing activity centers. You know, here are some more urban examples. I know in Albany it runs downtown as well. But in a suburban location, there's also an opportunity to serve existing office parks that a fixed guideway may not be able to serve, like a light rail. So BRT can be a catalyst for development. It is a catalyst for development. A couple things are different about TOD when it's associated with the bus. Typically, the area that development happens is a little closer to the station. Development may not be quite as dense. Often BRT runs up a highway median, and of course, getting from the developable sites to the middle of a highway can be challenging. But the real takeaway here is that the service level, the level of service is really important than the mode. You know, if the bus comes every 10 minutes, people know it's coming and it's comfortable and it gets you there quick, it'll spur development. So here's an example in the Northeast. This is outside Hartford, CT Fast Track, very successful. It really approximates a light rail service. It runs in a former freight right-of-way, so it's almost all of it is in a dedicated guideway, really significant stations. And this is an example of a vision for TOD build out where Hartford meets West Hartford, if you're familiar with the region, but development is happening. The upper right-hand corner isn't a rendering, it's an actual building that's constructed and occupied. So once again, how does all this come together? For BRT, just the same way it does for TOD. Plan for TOD up front, make the right infrastructure investments, be strategic about which station you're planning for development, and it will happen. So that's it, thank you, and any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So I do have a question for, I guess this goes back to Nicole's presentation that's been sitting here for a little bit, so I want to make sure we get this answered. And in the meanwhile, hopefully people can put some questions in for John. But to the question, so let me read it as it is. As we know, the New York State DOT controls many of the highways where complete streets would be beneficial. The DOT is also very controlling when it comes to lowering speed limits when asked by municipalities. How do you overcome work with this reality?
I do know that, you know, the speeds are an issue, especially if you want to create a, you know, reduced lanes and if you want to have a walkable, safe area. That being said, the DOT does have in their manuals, you know, design guidance for complete streets, and you know, maybe just the topology is a different type than it would be obviously in a downtown area. You know, I think some of the support that could be generated, you know, could come from the constituents, from, you know, lawmakers and community grassroots type stuff. You know, if enough pressure is put on to some of the powers that be, I think a lot of the, you know, more densely associated topologies with complete streets could be incorporated into some higher speed roadways. But, you know, I think DOT isn't going to go out on a limb either. As much as I think their design guidelines do say, yes, we are considering these options, you know, I think there really does need to be some effort put in through the communities and through the municipalities to tell them, you know, regardless of who owns this, we want a different system in place, and show them, you know, that either the need is there or the demand is there. And you know, in my limited opinion, I feel like, you know, that's really the key there to incorporating some of these.
Wonderful. And then I just have a follow-up to the question before about the 4 to 5 lane highways. Somebody actually responded that there's an equation. I believe how you determine the crossing time is an equation, length of crossing feet divided by 2.5 seconds per foot. So time in seconds for crossing signal. So I did share this in the question and answer. You can see that there. If all the attendees can want to look at that, but I just thought that was useful to share. So thank you, Brent, for sharing that.
Right, based on the speed of the walker is, I think, what that's related to. So.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't see any more questions here. So I think we're going to wrap it up. And as somebody asked, we will share the contact information for the presenters in our follow-up email to this. So if you have further questions, I'm sure you guys would be happy to answer for anybody that would like to. All right, so I just wanted to thank you for attending the webinar today on Complete Streets and TOD, and thank you so much to our wonderful presenters, Nicole and John. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and is going to be available at cdrpc.org and on CDRPC's YouTube page. We're going to be sending out an automated email to participants who register with email addresses with information that can be submitted for credit to your municipality. This session has also been submitted to AICP CM for 1 credit hour. So thanks again, and we hope you'll join us next week for our webinar on application of GIS for municipal infrastructure planning and water resource protection, presented by Chase and Companies.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks
all
for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.